Section 2.9 in the book is about the Java API documentation. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and all programming languages have these. And basically, it's just a collection of all the different things that you can use in the programming language. It's chunks of code that other people have written that are very useful and that sometimes are just kind of a necessary part of the programming language, but sometimes are just tools that you can use. And so we'll take a look at some of those in just a moment. Now, in some IDEs, integrated development environments, you have a built-in documentation. It's very common these days to just have the documentation up on the internet. And so the Java API can be found online. So we'll just go to our web browser. And let me back up a step here. If you just go to Google and search for API documentation, you'll get a link. And what I noticed was the first one that comes up is for edition 7, and we're up to edition 8 now. So if you look closely at the web address, you can see where it says 7. You can actually just change that to 8. And there you go. So, you know, not a whole lot changes between these editions that affects us, probably nothing actually. So it wouldn't really matter much, probably. But safer to be in the one that we're using. Okay, so over here on the left, you've got these a list of packages. And like I said, these are collections of related tasks or functions that you can plug into your programs and use. And so we've already used Java AWT. And so we can look through this. Once you select AWT, a list shows up down here. And if you go down to classes, you can see all kinds of stuff. Button, checkbox, color, dialog, event, frame. And the example we'll use, which is the one that the textbook is using, is a rectangle. And you can find that right there. So if I click on rectangle, I get the description of the rectangle class. First of all, the name is up here, which package it comes from, and then where it gets its superclasses from. That's a topic we'll get into later, but basically a rectangle is built on these classes that are listed above it. So, you know, at the base level, you have a java.lang.object, and beneath that you have a AWT geometry rectangular shape, and then geometry rectangle 2D, and the regular old rectangle is based on all of these. So it contains all the information that these guys do, plus a little bit more. And that's called being subclassed from these guys. Okay, interfaces is something we'll cover later. Actually, I'm not sure if that's involved on the AP test. We may skip it, but and then down here, you've got a description of the class and how it works. Usually what you want to do when you look up something on the API is you want to jump down to the method list, and that's all the things that rectangles can do. Right above that, though, is an important section called the field summary. Fields are the internal data that a rectangle keeps track of. So a rectangle has a height, a width, an X, and a Y, and we've already been using that a little bit. So those are the internal variables. Every rectangle you create will have those. There's some other ones that, like it says here, were inherited from the superclass, but we won't talk about those. Okay, and then constructors are a very specific type of method. And those are the methods that build a brand new rectangle, construct a new rectangle. And so when we say rectangle, new rectangle, and then we give it an X and a Y and a width and a height, we're using this constructor. And notice there's multiple constructors and they all are named rectangle. Okay, a constructor always has the same name as the class. The way that the computer tells the difference between which version of the constructor we're calling is what you put in the parentheses. So when we put in X, Y, width, and height, we're using this version. If I were to just use rectangle without anything in the parameters, it would construct a rectangle with 0 and 0 for X and Y, and 0 and 0 for height and width. So that would be just a point, essentially. And so there's variations on that. And then below that, you've got the method summary. And these are all the different things that you can do with a rectangle. All rectangles can do these jobs. And so let's say you want to see if a certain point in the grid is inside of your rectangle. You can ask your rectangle for the contains method. You can say my rectangle dot contains, and then you can give it 7 and 5, or whatever numbers you want. And it will check whether or not 7 and 5 is inside the bounds of your rectangle. And if it is, it will return true. If it's not, it will return false. That's what a Boolean value is. It's a true-false. And we'll cover that in detail later. Let's move down the page to one that we've actually used before, and that is translate. And so let me back up. So translate, it says void. And what that means is the translate method returns nothing. It just does a job and finishes. We don't get any information back from it. So if you remember from the return types and parameters lesson, when you use a method like string.length, that returns something. It tells you how long the character string is, and it returns a number to represent that. Translate, on the other hand, just moves a rectangle to a new spot. It doesn't return any information to you. It doesn't do anything. So it just, void means it's once it's done its job, it's finished. Okay, so that's basically how the API works. You look up your packages, and then you look for the classes you want to use, and you find out all the things that they can do. You can click on one of these methods and get a very detailed description of what it does and what parameters are involved and how they're used. And then some related methods that you may want to look at because they may do the same job in a better way. Another one we can look at is all classes. Let's go to the string class. Here it is. And so if we look down at the string method list, it starts here and it ends there. So there's quite a few. And so you can use the replace method, and that will take a new character and replace an old character and return the new version of that string. You could split a string, and so if you look through this list, you start seeing how some of these might be useful. Here's one that tells you if your string matches another one. And so it returns true or false, and things like that. So lots of useful things if you're wanting to deal with strings. Okay, so that's the API documentation. You look it up online. Try to use the one that is version 8, and that just includes everything that's part of the standard edition Java library, and it's thousands of classes and packages that you can take a look at and use in your program. You don't have to write any of the code. It's already written for you. You just kind of learn how it works and use it in your code. Okay, after that, you should be able to handle the two self-check questions on page 53.